Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm gonna help you fix some of the repetition issues in your content. Most business owners that I support online, and the way I support them is I do some done for you stuff when it comes to emails or sales pages, do some Facebook ads. These are the ways I'm supporting them. But one of the main issues that a lot of entrepreneurs hire me for is to help breathe some novelty into their ideas and the way that they were selling. What I have been noticing, especially if you have been in business, especially if a business owner have been around there for about 5 years, like 4 to 5 years, like that's usually the time when they get tired of their own message. And it doesn't mean that they get tired of what they are selling. It's just they get tired of the way they've been selling it. Thing is, like, it's just that you feel like you have been repeating yourself like a broken record. And like I said, it's not that there's problem with repetition because the audience is hearing it for the first time. But I also want to make sure to the entrepreneur, we make it a bit more fun and enjoyable instead of being boring and repetitive, okay? Because the more you feel like it's a drag, like here we go again, I'm going to say the same thing again, like I know the script. Yes, there is some confidence in the reps as well, but then if you don't feel excited about the way you present your offers, like sometimes when you, like how you sell it, how you transition into sales, like when you do webinars, and it just don't feel like excited about presenting your presentations that you usually do because of the repetition. Even though yes, it's good repetition, but if you want to kind of juice it up, you want to make it different, I'm going to give you some ideas on how to make your message a bit more different. So we're not going to change what you are selling at the end. What we're going to say is how you go about talking about your offer, okay? So I have 3 messaging tips for you today that I'm going to share with you to help you kind of overcome that. Okay, my mic is still on. To help you kind of overcome that boredom that comes from repetition. So the very first messaging tip that I have for you is use proximity messaging. The most potent way for you to get your message across. And the reason why proximity messaging is very effective is because it's based on human interactions and real world client experiences. So instead of going about your story the usual way, you can use everyday interactions with your clients. You can use conversations, or even you can use problems that come up for clients, and you can start tying that to a message and tying that to your product or service. Okay, so instead of talking about, problem solution type of deal, which is somehow that's how most people present their offers, like, you have this problem, you grab a very specific example and you lead with that very specific example of a client Y or a client Z or a client A that is actually based on facts. Like, I'm not telling you, you don't have to disclose the identity of these people. I just want you to give a concrete, everyday human live client interaction or issue that you have seen and how your product or service managed to solve this issue. Okay, so again, I like to use and lead with these very raw client interactions that I'm having sometimes like at the very beginning of my content, and then leading that to some kind of lessons and takeaways and a possible call to action or product. In your scenario, if we are looking at a presentation platform, like a presentation, like an online live presentation, that's how I would lead. I would look at almost like a case study type of approach of a real human client interaction that you had and how that led you to lessons and how that led you to the solution that you're going to be presenting to people. The reason why it's worked so good is because, one, you never run out of things to say. So the moment you are in business and you are interacting with people, you will always have an abundance of content ideas because you will see, oh, this person today had this issue. Okay, how about I talk about this and tie that to my product, and how it's relevant to my product, how I'm helping people. Or it's almost like feeding you every day and you end up with a notebook of a billion ideas of, okay, this issue, that client, and you will know exactly who was the client when you are talking about them. You don't have to tell and disclose the personal information, of course, but what we're using is we're using this content to anchor you into reality and to also be very, very, very relevant for the people who are also in the same situation, okay? So this makes, humanizes as well the problems. It's not in talking in vague terms of like, is this you, right? But like really specifically knowing that, okay, there is this type of person and I'm going to talk about that type of person because I have many examples of people and clients facing the same issue, and I'm just going to grab a very real example of how that has been affecting my client and then how my solution helped that client, okay? So that's kind of the format. So step one is proximity interaction in form of a story. Like I like to use stories as well to kind of get people to pay attention, and you get invested into stories more than just hypothetical scenarios. So use a story, a very real interaction of a client. Step two, deepening the interaction, infusing it with relevant and valuable insights to the readers. So how is this relevant to me that you're explaining? How this is a real issue that I should pay attention to? And then step three, lessons and takeaways and how your solution ties into this whole thing, okay? That's kind of my step one proximity messaging type of way. Again, because of the mere fact that you have clients that you interact all the time, you literally never run out of stories to tell. Never, ever. And that always can become a lesson that can be tied into what you're selling, okay? So a question for you to reflect on this is, what unique interactions are you having in your business that can be tied into a lesson and infused into the way you present your products or services? This is a skill that you can develop over time. The more you pay attention to the questions that come up, the stories that you hear, the more you can infuse that to your messaging and to the way you present your solutions, okay? The second tip, to not drag this video to be super long, the second tip is your real life stories to tie into your product and service. Now, this is not even your origin story, which I think origin stories entrepreneurs do really, really badly, okay? So when they present an origin story, in order for them to make a connection of like, hey, I've been there, I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I got to the solution. And what I don't think that most entrepreneurs pay attention to is the believability of the story, because of the amount of jumps that there is in the origin story. So it seems to us sometimes, and I'm also like, when I'm viewing clients and their work and this aspect, I'm able to highlight if there is some jumps in the story that makes it unbelievable to me. And I do that, like they don't mind me telling that feedback to them because they are usually very open to feedback. But basically, when we have a story of like, hey, I've been single for so long, I went to read some books, and then next day I got married and I found the love of my life. Well, that sounds to me that it's a huge jump between you being single, reading some books, and finding the love of your life. And of course, if your solution is somehow like, well, I learned about this and learned about that, and that's how I developed my program, and I replicated this, now I expanded this to many people. So the minute we give the jumpy stories, we lose credibility immediately. So if you are going to use the origin story to tie it to your product or service, I would make sure that do this instead. So instead of giving a global scale of an origin story or a story that is happening to you in real time, I would look at micro stories within the origin story. So it can be the day when your wife has left you and you have seen, if you've seen you went home that day, after you had a workout, you went home that day and you've seen your wife, packed up with suitcases ready to leave you, right? So instead of, and then explaining how that affected you and how that made you change the ways that you're operating, and then how that got you to the solution that you are trying to sell in this scenario. So again, micro stories. It can also be micro stories that happening to you in real time. So for example, I shared, and you guys can look it up if you want to, I shared a micro story about how a sewing lady, when I was going to get my clothes, my new dress altered, how the sewing lady was undercharging and how she was a very bad salesperson. And I tie that into a lesson, and I tie that into a value, like how you need to see your own value and how we can get into our heads about our value. Now, I didn't take it to a step further to a call to action, because my intention was not to make a sale, but the real life stories can be tied into like the everyday stories. It can be a micro story of a thing that happened to you that day, or that happened to you that day when you made the realization. So I'd rather you not go into a global scale when you're presenting, but go into a micro story that is very much in the reality, is real, is actually happened to you. You don't have to add to it. Like, you don't have to, put more than there is. You just tell the whole story, in the micro story, and you give more detail to that instead of going to like, hey, whole global scale, big jumps, like here's my product and service, okay? If the more you can stay grounded in reality, the more you select a micro story that is very relevant, that is very relevant to what you're selling and why you're doing what you're doing, and how it is helpful for people. The more you can be the micro storying on this one, the more effective the message will get, and the more believable it will get. And again, you will never run out of these micro stories, because you're gonna live your life. I imagine things will happen to you, and you will get a sense of, oh, how this can be a story or that can be a story. And to be honest with you, you really develop this creative mindset on when things happen to you. You immediately think, okay, how can this be turned into kind of a story that I can tie into what I'm doing here? Okay, so you kind of develop that skill. Okay, third option that I like to use is contextual messaging. So when we have to, like, in comparison to proximity messaging, contextual messaging is a bit different. Proximity messaging is basically day-to-day interactions with your client that fuel your messaging and fuel the way you talk about your products and services. Contextual messaging is not closely related to people. It's not closely related to clients per se, but it's basically when we create stories or logical explanations around why our buyers have their problem in the first place. So basically, we create stories or logical explanations around why our buyers have their problems in the first place. Contextual messaging is actually not easy to come up with, because it is also grounded in research. The purpose of contextual messaging is to persuade the person, to then letting them logically get to a conclusion that your product, service, or solution is what they need. Okay, so we are not trying to convince them per se. We are basically presenting the arguments and the context in which they can come to the conclusion themselves. Okay, now it sounds a bit complicated if I explain it to you like this, but I'm going to give you a context, okay? Okay, I'm going to give you an example of a copy that I've written for a relationship coach, and this was called Wired Differently. The whole premise of this context was that the reason why men and women have so many arguments is simply because their brains are wired differently. Once you understand these core differences, you can avoid arguments and understand your partner better. For example, when your partner comes home from work, due to his caveman nature, all they want to do is relax, stare brainlessly at the campfire after hunting down a mammoth. Now, in modern day, it means that your man needs to just zone out, and actually their brain functions are at 10%. On the contrary, women are the opposite. Our brain functions in the evening at 90%, all we want to do is to share our life with our partner. And when we feel like we're not being heard and our partner is completely checked out, we get frustrated, and this creates a lot of arguments. Well, I can tell you that there are many other small misunderstandings that come from having a differently wired brain that create huge issues in relationships. And in fact, I have an upcoming masterclass on uncovering the core differences, and so you can understand them and avoid any arguments. Contextual messaging that is very much based in reality, but most of the times we are challenging assumptions, okay? We are challenging assumptions. We are also coming up with different premises to approach the same issue in ways that you may have not heard before, but we are not telling you that we are the logical solution. So if you find this helpful, let me know. If you need some of my personal help in helping you implement any of these messaging tactics because you feel like you have been repeating in your marketing and what I've shared with you is not enough and you need my personal help in helping you come up with your own contextual messaging, helping you come up with your own proximity messaging, and helping you kind of like distill down how to turn an interaction into a story, you can message me and send me a DMs, and I'm happy to go on a quick consultation session with you.